Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stop the Leaks, How Your Website is Quietly Draining Revenue. So if you haven't met me before, I'm Philippa Games. I've reviewed a ton of websites in my time, and I can tell you that very, very few of them were not leaving money on the table in some way, either because they were missing opportunities for generating more revenue, because they were missing opportunities that you could tell from the analytics that we'll talk about in a while for creating new products or services or target markets, or because they were wasting money on marketing tactics that don't work, maybe don't work at all or don't work for them. But so and the only way that you could tell these leaks is really from looking at some of the analytics and some of the data. So my goal today is to show you some of the common and key things that I see happening in this area. And of course, some of the things to do about them. So here's what you might be worried about. This presentation is not going to be a whole load of charts and graphs and stuff like that, because I know that a lot of business owners and decision makers do glaze over when they see this kind of thing. I've done a lot of speaking in my time, and I know that I have to be very careful how much of this I show. So there won't be a lot of charts, graphs, and so on. I'll show you a little bit just to prove that I can do it. But my goal really is to talk to you as business people about the strategies, about the considerations, about the things that you should know about your website and how to think about it, how to approach what you could get out of analytics. Because here's the point. If you aren't looking at your analytics data, then in my humble opinion, you are totally flying blind with everything that you're doing with your marketing and or your website, because you can't know. There are so many things that you can't tell just by looking at the website. You can't tell what's working, what's not working, where you're missing those opportunities, where you could be doing better, and so on. It's just not possible. And some very, very nice websites have exactly some of the problems that I'm going to show you. So just to be very clear about who I am, these are some of the clients that I've worked with over the years. I've done both professional speaking and consulting. So these are some of the sort of larger companies I've worked with that you might recognize, but I've also worked with a lot of smaller businesses as well, and nonprofits, associations, and so on. And as you can tell from some of the logos here, I've also taught at 3 international business schools, which I've very much enjoyed. I know some of my students might be watching this, so welcome if you are. I've written 2 books. This one came out, something over 10 years ago now, but this one I'm honored to say was endorsed by Guy Kawasaki. And this is my new book that's just come out that I'm very excited to share with everybody. It's called Website Wealth, A Business Leader's Guide to Driving Real Value from Your Analytics. This one is endorsed, if you know analytics, it's endorsed by Avinash Kaushik and Jim Stern. That is a huge honor. It's endorsed by Dory Clark, who is executive education faculty at Columbia Business School. And again, it's a strategic guide. It's not full of charts and graphs. It's a lot more of the kinds of things that we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. All right, so enough of that. Let's talk about what are leaks and how do you know a leak? How do you know what to look for? So in order to stop leaks on your website, you've got to know what your website's about. And that might sound very simplistic, but I've actually, honestly, and I know that practitioners say the same thing here. There are a lot of times when I talk to business owners about what is your website supposed to do? What's it about? It's difficult for them to actually articulate that clearly to me. So when I start a consulting engagement with a client, the first thing that we talk about is not looking at the website at all. It's talking about what are your goals? And this could be the goals for the website and obviously also therefore in some ways for the business. So everybody thinks about the major goal, which obviously is to make money. So that could be sales. If you're B2B, that could be sales leads. If you're a nonprofit, it could be donations, memberships, etc. But the thing that directly gets you in the money. But of course, there are a lot of other goals, minor or you might say micro goals, which may not generate you immediate revenue, but which are creating and nurturing the relationship that you might have with your visitors. So maybe completing contact forms or inquiry forms, newsletter signups. We'll talk about the power of email marketing, spec sheets, downloads of ebooks, PDFs, whatever it might be, if that's important to people understanding what you're offering. Consuming videos and podcasts. So I've seen a lot of sites where there's tons of video or tons of podcasts, and people watch literally the first 10 seconds. And that's it, they go away. So you spent all this time and effort making this video and people aren't watching it. And now, of course, you can measure exactly how much they consume, and that can be important. Things like successful customer support chats, or, are people getting frustrated? Every time somebody gets frustrated on your site, that's a point of friction that can take them away and lose you that visitor. So here's one of my mantras. Every page of your site should have a strategy. Every page of your site, you should know what you expect the visitor to do as a result of seeing that page. And you should tell them. You should direct them around the site to the outcomes that you want them to have. Because if you don't, I can absolutely tell you that they won't, almost always, they won't do what you want. They won't do what you had expected them to do. They'll go somewhere else. So really be clear about what's the point of this page? Where do people go next? And a lot of people say to me, so what are the key metrics that I should be measuring? And in typical consultant mode, I say, you know what? It depends. It depends on your goals, what's going on for you right now with your website. And people obsess about things like, we call them vanity metrics, right? The number of visitors. So if you have more visitors this week or this month than you did last week or last month, is that good? I don't know. It depends. Were they the right sort of visitor? Did they do the things you wanted them to do? Because if not, all the visitors in the world aren't doing you any good. Bounce rate. People obsess about the bounce rate. So the bounce rate being the number of people who leave your site very quickly. Obviously, if you have a 90% bounce rate, that's pretty bad. But if you have a 50% bounce rate, for example, then isn't it maybe more important to think about the 50% of people who didn't leave your site, but who stayed there? What was their experience? Did they fulfill the outcomes that you wanted? What's going on for them, as opposed to the ones who left? And I can tell you that in my experience as well, there will always be a bounce rate. There are always people who come to your site for the wrong reason, and they're going to leave, and that's good because you don't want them messing up the rest of your data, right? If I see a 5% bounce rate on a site, I normally question whether that data is clean. So really thinking about, when you're talking about what metrics should I be measuring? What are you expecting to learn? Obviously, you want to look at the conversions. Conversions are people doing what you want them to do, again, whether that's the sale or the sign up or whatever it might be. You want to know which is your most valuable content, or the links that take people to those outcomes and put them in the frame of mind where they're going to complete those outcomes. So what are your most compelling calls to action? What works best for you? It's important, when you're thinking about your metrics, to include the whole customer journey. And this is something that I also see. People focus a lot on acquisition. That's how do people get to your site? Obviously, because you want to know you're doing well in search engines. You want to know if your advertising is paying off. And we'll look at an example of that in a minute. People then obviously look at the purchase event, the actual conversion where you make the money. But there's a whole amount of stuff in the middle of that, which is, the behavior section of the analytics, the engagement section. There are people watching the content that persuades them to interact and buy your stuff. Are they watching that video? Are they moving around the site? Are they reading your blog if you have a blog? Are they looking for support, and are they getting it? And it's really important to look at those things too, because if things go wrong while they're checking you out and deciding if they trust you and whether they believe that you can do what you say you do, then they're not going to buy. So it's important to look at your metrics across all of the engagements that the customer has with you. And here's a really important thing. Do not measure laundry lists full of metrics. I've seen this again and again. You can't focus. If you're measuring, metric after metric after metric, nothing is going to stand out to you. And if you try to do some testing to see if you can improve something, you're not honestly going to know what you did that actually made the difference. So only measure what you're actually going to act on in the moment. And Avinash Kaushik, who I've mentioned, has endorsed actually both my books. Um, and I used to actually teach alongside Avinash, so I learned this very well from him. It was a great honor to do that. And he had a measurement model where that I still use, where you really identify only a maximum of about 9 metrics, maybe between 6 and 9 metrics that you're focused on at any one time. But those metrics you're really using to test out what's going on. And if you make changes, like you make changes to the text on a call to action button or something like that, does it make a difference? If you try to refine your shopping cart process, does it make a difference? You can't measure everything all the time. It just doesn't work. So some things to look for, and again, we'll take a quick look at some examples afterwards. But just very quickly, one of the things I'm seeing a lot right now is long pages. So obviously with mobile, we're using longer pages so that people can scroll rather than have to keep clicking on new pages. The problem is that if people don't scroll all the way down the page, then whatever you've got going on further down the page, they're not going to see because they're not ever going to get there. And you can use analytics to measure how far down the page people scroll. And that's going to tell you how much of your content they're not seeing typically. And if that's important content, you're going to want to do something about that. Either move the content, do some more compelling things to make people keep scrolling, whatever it might be. But it's important to know where are people stopping on any given page. We've talked about calls to action. So the call to action is the thing that says, buy this, sign up here, whatever it might be. A lot of pages are long pages and they don't necessarily have a lot of calls to action in. We're getting better at that. But, test your calls to action as well. See whether which kind of wording works better. There's nothing wrong with having lots of different calls to action through down the page and seeing, which one is the most effective or which two are the most effective so that you can do more of those. Your processes, so where you have bookings or sign-ups or shopping carts, it's amazing how many people are still abandoning shopping carts. But if people are getting stuck, where are they getting stuck? Why are they getting stuck? Again, your analytics and screen recordings that I'll show you and so on will give you great clues about this that you literally can't tell just by looking at the site. But you want to know if people are stopping, where are they stopping and why? And here's a really big one. Lots of stories in my book about what you can get out of the site search. So I'm talking about if you have a lot of content or a lot of different items on your site that you're selling or whatever, you've got to have a search engine. And that search engine helps people to find stuff. Yes, obviously. This is the search engine on your site now. We're not talking about Google or Bing or whatever. Yes, it helps people to find something, which gives you the clues about what they put in there, that there might be some things that they find that are difficult for them to find. But being able to see in the analytics what people are searching for is huge. And I'll show you an example of that later on as well. But just it tells you what words they use to describe your products and services. And those might be different from your words. So if you're using a lot of terminology in your industry that you realize visitors don't understand because they're not using those same words, that's going to inform back to your search strategy, your search engine strategy, your advertising. What kind of words do you want to use to draw people in to see what you have? And their searches can also really help you understand what they're looking for. And if they're looking for things which are within your expertise, your ability to offer, but you're not currently offering them, that's clues as well to developing new products and services. And in my book, I have several examples where with clients we've done exactly that, and it's been very successful based on what we've seen in the site search engine. So we'll come back to that in shortly. So a couple of other points. So one of the things that's really important to do is to dig deeper. Don't just take the surface numbers. Don't treat all of your visitors as sort of one conglomerate mass, but segment. So segment means dividing visitors by different characteristics, whatever that might be, so that you can see how one group of visitors might behave very differently from another group of visitors, or you can spot opportunities based on looking at relative numbers of visitors. So let me give you an example of that. So I did promise that I'm not going to do a whole load of data screens, but this is a very, very basic screen. As you can see, this is straight out of Google Analytics. This is analytics from a New York nonprofit called St. George's Society, which I've done some work for recently. So St. George is the patron saint of England. So the St. George's Society of New York, their membership, the people that they try to attract are expat Brits living in the US, of which, of course, I am one. But and so they have lots of events in order to raise money for their missions, which, you know, are supporting disadvantaged students, disabled people, and so on, homeless people. They have lots of English themed or British themed events like Wimbledon watch parties and pub quizzes and stuff like that. So I looked at their membership. So I asked them, you know, where do people come from? So most of their events are in-person events. And so their catchment area geographically is what they call the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So I just put together this little report which shows you people. I filtered out all the people from those 3 states, and this is everybody else. And the important thing about this report is this number here, 1,300, which consistently represents about 40% of all their visitors. So here's where we can start to get more creative. So consistently 40% of their visitors are from outside the tri-state area where they might come to physical events. And I said to them, you know, they do have a membership from afar category where they, you know, you can become a member if you live like me in California. But, you know, what they provide for these people is not really, it's basically a donation because they don't do a lot. But I said, you know, Brits, you know, in America love to hang out together and be Brits. Why not have more online events? Why not do more for all these people now we're used to being online? So let's have a virtual Wimbledon watch party. Or, for example, there's a black tie gala coming up in November where Simon Le Bon is from Duran Duran, right, is the guest of honor. Well, what about having a virtual meet and greet for out-of-state people with Simon Le Bon as a special event, you know, before the main in-person event? So hopefully they quite liked these ideas. But, you know, what I'm doing here is saying, look, here's a significant chunk of visitors that are outside your main target market or your main target catchment area. But is there more that we can do with them that at the same time would generate more revenue for us? And so this is a bit of a fun example, but my goal here with this content is to get you thinking about, could there be visitors to our website who are outside of our normal buyers, but who we could do something for? And I'll give you some more examples of that later on. Here's another example of where segmenting can be really helpful. So this is actually, if you might see the pound signs in the corner over there, this is actually a business to consumer site. It's a fashion sales site that I worked with. And the point here is we're looking at traffic sources, right? How people get to the site. And the thing that I want to point out here is when we segment by traffic source, so we're not looking at all visitors together, we're looking at them by source, we can clearly see that the top 2 traffic sources, which are organic search, so that's people coming in from Google and so on, and their email newsletter, generate much higher engagement. So this is the average time they spend on the site. That might not look like a lot, but obviously that's the average. So there's people who spend a lot more than that and who generate way more revenue than people from other traffic sources. And the thing that makes this important is a lot of people are very seduced by social media advertising. So here's the paid social, and you can see that a lot less time spent on the site and essentially no revenue that can be immediately attributed to paid social. And this is something where I really encourage people to segment, because people, you know, paid social ads can be very seductive. They're not that expensive. You'll get a lot of click-throughs. We're definitely getting the click-throughs here. But that traffic, in my experience, tends to be less high quality And if you're spending money on social media ads, so that means not only how many clicks are you getting, but what happens afterwards. This are they fulfilling the outcomes that you want? A lot of the time they don't. And so when I have clients doing social media ads, it's not that I don't want you to do that, but let's make sure that it's actually paying off. Maybe we don't want them to buy something, we want them to do something else. Whatever it is we want them to do, are they doing it? And of course, we can, as I said, you need to dig as deeply as possible. So we can split these paid social people into um, the actual different networks. So we could split them by Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, etc., and see which platform works the best. So digging deeper and deeper to see where is it working and where is it not working. And I find this very interesting. I've been doing some research on how well people are implementing analytics, and segmenting and really looking at visitors in different groupings is something that a lot of people don't do. And I think there you're really exposing yourselves to leaks if you're not doing that. All right, and one more, and then we're going to look at some more at some other examples online. But staying above the silos. So for those of you that are in larger organizations, I can't tell you how much I've seen that politics has got in the way of effective marketing and effective use of the website. So that means, one department doesn't talk to another department. The high level leadership isn't hearing what lower levels of people are saying that we need to do. Politics is a problem. The thing I love about data is it can hopefully get around the politics, because you can't argue with the numbers of what you can see going on. Here's one example. This is a client that's in the logistics business, and they have a software app. And so they have a 14-day free trial for this software app. And they called me in and they said, could you please make sure that our Google Analytics is syncing well with our Google Ads, because that data helps people, helps the ads to get properly targeted, because we can see the visitors that are the best conversions. So I did that, and that was all fine. And a couple of weeks later, they called me back and they said, are you sure you did that correctly? Because our ads are reporting lots and lots of clicks, but we're getting almost no signups for this free trial. And so, of course, I checked my work and hopefully it was fine. And then I looked at the analytics, and here's the page where this is the only thing happening on the page. The page is dedicated to getting people to sign up for a free trial. And I'm sure that if you're looking at this, you're probably already ahead of me as to what is wrong with this page. It's asking, these are people who have just maybe heard of this company. They're just thinking about this, could this software help me? And it's asking them all sorts of stuff like, what's your company size? What industry are you in? What's your phone number? What type of role do you have? Can you create a password? I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. And when I looked at the analytics, it was clear that it was an absolutely minuscule conversion rate based on the people seeing the page. And it was the same across all marketing channels. So it actually wasn't the fault of the ads at all. It wasn't the fault of the guy doing the ads. I think my suggestion is that they should get rid of most of the questions on this page. And as somebody goes into their trial, then the salespeople can call them up and start saying, how's the trial going? What are you thinking? And can we ask you a few questions? The problem here is that the sales department owns this page. Obviously, the sales department wants this information to qualify the lead. But I think that it's shooting them in the foot, because my theory is that this is why people aren't signing up. And so they're wasting essentially thousands of dollars worth of advertising spend every month. They're wasting the salary of the poor advertising guy who's getting flack because his ads aren't producing visitors that convert, and it's really not his fault. All right, so just going to pause sharing for a second and take you to some different examples. So let's take a look at an actual website and just put into play some of the things that I've been talking about. So I have picked a completely random website. This is a company called APC International. They make piezoelectricity. I honestly don't know what that is. But I have been doing some work with some manufacturing clients as an example, and I just went to a site that best manufacturing websites, and this was one that got recommended. So I thought I would take a look at it and just illustrate to you the kinds of things that I'm looking for and the kinds of things I've talked about up till now, putting that into practice. So here we are on the homepage. And what I start looking for is where are the calls to action? So we've got get quote, contact us. And then I can start scrolling down. So we've got calculator, some sale items. We've got some detail about different products and a contact call to action. Here we've got, let's see, products difference. Actually, what I don't like here, by the way, is all these capital letters. People don't like reading text with loads of capital letters, but contact an expert. Okay. You can see that we're starting to scroll quite a long way now. And remember that analytics can tell us how far down the page people are scrolling. Get a quote on parts. We're still scrolling. Now here we have something interesting. One of the things that really puts people off, and I'll show you an example of this in a second, is where they click on something on the page that they think should be a link and it isn't. So here we have highest product quality, long product service life, 35 plus years of experience, superior customer service, especially this one where we've got even the headphone here, has me wondering whether people tried clicking on this to get to the chat. I don't know that. Analytics could tell me. So at the moment, I'm just looking at this site from the front, right, just to see what kind of questions come up for me about the visitor experience on this site. So we have some articles, and you notice we're still scrolling. So we've been scrolling quite a long time. And by the way, actually one very nice thing about this site, see up here, we have the site search. Remember I talked about how important the site search is. So we've got search here, and which stays in view as I'm on the page scrolling down, as well as the navigation and the get quote. So that's a very nice touch. Let's scroll down to a bit more. Now we're down at the bottom of the page, and way down at the bottom of the page, we find the sign up for our newsletter. So we know, we've just seen some proof, but email marketing is consistently reported as one of the most effective forms of marketing that there is. And so getting somebody's email address and having them say, yes, you can contact me is a really key thing to be doing. And this is the only place I saw the sign up for the newsletter, way down the bottom of the page. I would be questioning how many people actually see that and sign up for the newsletter, and that maybe that's something that that it would help them if they had in a more visible place. Let's go back up a bit. And let's take a look at some of the articles. So we're on the articles page, and so I said I have no idea what piezoelectricity is. So let's take a look at an explanation article. And by the way, here we have a date. I just wanted to point this out. The date was February of last year. If this content is not time sensitive, i.e. what it says is still completely relevant today, you might consider removing the date just because you don't want something to look older and put people off when it's still perfectly relevant. But let's, so here we have the article about how it works, what it is. It's very interesting. We're not going to read it now, but it explains it very, very nicely, how it all works. And then we get down to what are some applications of these sensors. So we have security alarms, we have smartphones, and then it started to get interesting to me because then it says musical instruments. Instruments like electric guitars, violins, pianos, microphones, bass drums, cymbals. We talked earlier about people who come to the website who aren't the immediate target market. And obviously, I assume this is a B2B site. But obviously, regular, ordinary people like you and me, play electric guitars and bass drums and so on. And I've had a number of experiences where a B2B site has found a consumer audience, and we've actually created some side businesses to serve the consumer audience because we know they're coming, and we can set something up that isn't very expensive to set up, and it's been extremely valuable. And again, the detail of that is in the book that just came out, Website Wealth. But this got me thinking about here. So it says electric guitars have a piezoelectric strip under the bridge that captures the vibration of the guitar strings, allowing the sensors to process and amplify the instrument's produced sound. So, that just got me thinking, like, okay, if I have an electric guitar, does it have one of these in it, or can I get one? So let's go to the search engine. And so here's an example of what I'm saying about the search engine. So I can type in guitar strip. And really bad news, it just comes back and says no results. And, this is the worst type of search engine result page you can possibly get, because this is slamming the door in my face. And if you have a search engine on your site, please try to do something differently. Like, you can do all sorts of things like recommended different alternative products, call us, email us. If the product is out of stock, let us, we can let you know when it's back in. What alternatives do you have to just saying, sorry, we ain't got this? But notice also that if this company noticed that I put in this guitar strip search, they might say, that's interesting. Somebody looking for, who's obviously maybe a consumer, and generating that kind of thinking. The other thing that's really helpful about the site search engine. So recently, another example, I had a manufacturing client who came to me and said, so this was a distributor of parts. They manufactured and distributed parts, and they came to me and said, for some reason that we don't understand, the sales on our website are going down. We don't know why. The traffic hasn't gone down, but our sales are falling, and we don't know. Can you help out? And we looked at what people were putting into the search engine. And over time, the parts that they manufactured, got upgraded. Maybe they changed their part numbers. So we saw in the search engine, and this is where this is so valuable, people typing in old part numbers or sometimes misspellings of the part name. And every time that happened, you would get this kind of result. Sorry, we haven't got it. And then obviously people were leaving and going to a different distributor, presumably. And so this is where we realized that there was a lot of this, right? So we realized that this was a problem. Once you know the problem, you can easily create a solution, which is a lookup table that maps old part numbers onto the current part numbers, common misspellings onto the correct spelling, and so on. And then you can produce the proper results, and boom, sales recover. But again, this is something that we couldn't possibly diagnose without looking at the analytics and being creative and thinking about what kinds of things we could look for. Okay, but there are some things that you can't tell from the analytics, and that's user behavior. So this is the last little section of this webinar, but I just want to show you a couple of other things. This is Microsoft Clarity, which I absolutely love. It's a screen recording and heat map tool. And this shows us stuff that we couldn't possibly know about what our users actually do. So this is recording user sessions, where they go, what they try to click on. This is back with the St. George's Society that I mentioned earlier, but I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. So this is a visitor on the Join St. George's Society page. So let's watch what happens here. They scroll down, you can see their cursor moving there, that little orange arrow. You can see, so every time there's a pulse like that, that means they try to click. And so what they're doing here is clicking on stuff that isn't clickable. I mentioned that earlier. These are dead links. So for example, I know it's small, I apologize, but it says invitations to exclusive invite-only events throughout the year. They want to know, tell me more about what these exclusive invite-only events are. They're clicking on that. They're saying, I'm interested, and they're not getting anything. So every time you notice somebody clicking on something where they're saying, tell me more, you don't want to give them that dead end again. So we can see that happening again and again. Notice now we can see this big red button that says become a member today. Now we're in the friends from afar section. So remember, that was the distance membership that I pointed out earlier. Notice again, there's a become a junior member today. There are two big red call to action buttons in view right now, but the visitor is keeping looking around. They've tried to click on some stuff that doesn't click, and in the end they give up. They never click on anything. So, what's going on? Who knows? Why don't they click on the actual call to action buttons? We don't know. But what we do see is them trying to engage with content that they can't engage with. And one more example of this. So this is an event registration page in fact, for the black tie ball. So we can watch the user starting to fill in the form here. So they fill in which ones they want. And now they're going to fill in the form. So we've got first name, last name, okay, email address, phone number, excellent. And of course, we're not seeing what they're actually filling in. Okay, they fill in their address. There we go. City, state, zip, country, and then they click continue. Now, I watched them filling in the form. They seem to fill in every field, wouldn't you say? I didn't see any problem with that. But when they click continue, they don't get to the next page. Something is wrong. What on earth can it be? I didn't see anything wrong. But as we watch them going back, trying to figure out what's gone wrong, we can see that address line, see there's a second little asterisk on the second address line that's currently blank. So apparently for some reason, this form thinks that the address should be split across two lines. And you can see them moving that cursor around, figuring this out. And then ultimately, they split their address across two lines. Okay, now that's done. Now we can hit continue. And now we move forward. Okay. So really odd. I mean, to me, I would never have thought, why are they not getting forward? Because there should be a second address line. And we don't know how many people got frustrated there and didn't complete that registration. And just before we finish, something that I think is kind of fun. So you can get AI insights for Google Analytics. You can get it for this is Microsoft Clarity, and you can get the AI insights here. But just so that we can reassure ourselves as human beings that we're not going to be completely written out of this picture, I looked at what the AI can tell us about this event, and it says, under the insights, the user navigated to the event registration page. They spent a significant amount of time filling out the form, which indicates interest in attending the event. Well, yes, that's pretty obvious. Then they tell us that there were multiple JavaScript errors. Okay. And then they say, but the user successfully completed their process and added the event to their calendar. This AI is not pointing out the key thing that we're noticing here, which is, yes, they did complete it, but only after some frustration and some trouble, which this particular visitor figured out. But we don't know whether all visitors are figuring that out. And so my interpretation, hopefully, is still a bit more valuable than the AI's one. And so hopefully human beings are still needed. All right.